Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Data Colada Seminar Series. And my name is Leif Nelson, and it's my pleasure today to have Liz Tenney joining us, as well as panelists Tamar Krebs, Crystal Farr, Elizabeth Morrison, Joey Chang, Kristen Bain, Nathan Potskov. In addition, we're joined by Joe Simmons and Yuri Simonson. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A function. And we encourage you during the presentation to submit questions or comments so that for both Liz and her co-authors to respond to. Even if they don't have a chance to get to all of them, they are saved and we'll share them with the authors afterwards. So all of the comments are useful. And I think that's about it. So Liz, the floor is yours, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, can y'all see that? Awesome. Okay, so yeah, as Leif said, I'm Liz Tenney. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Utah in the management department. And today's talk it's a little bit of a new topic for me. I had been, studying overconfidence and how people exchange information and decide whom to rely on and believe. And, it's usually the most confident person in the room. And so this is a little bit of a pivot as I'm starting to think about how do people and organizations make sure that they're listening to more perspectives and more voices. And so the take-home message in this talk, I like to start there, is I'm going to hopefully convince you that peer support matters and that peers are influential. And this is not necessarily a groundbreaking novel idea for this crowd, which no doubt has lots of social psychologists who, back with Kurt Lewin, invented the idea of peer influence. So really what I'm probably going to spend the talk trying to convince you of is the idea that this is interesting in this context. On this project, I have three amazing collaborators. Two of them are on the panel today, Tamar Krebs and Kristen Bain, and also Nathan Meckel is a collaborator. And what we're trying to do through two online experiments and one field study is increase our understanding of how social actors can capitalize on instances of voice to give a status boost to voicers who might otherwise be overlooked and help organizations realize the potential of employees' diverse perspectives. So what do we mean by voice? Voice can have a lot of different meanings. And by organizational voice, we're talking about speaking up with an idea for change. So these are improvement-oriented ideas or suggestions or contributions like, hey, our procedure for getting reimbursed is inefficient. Let's use some other system. And it's also your choice to do it. So it's not considered voice if the boss solicits or requires suggestions. And it's also considered an extra role behavior or an organizational citizenship behavior. So it's not formally written into job descriptions. And in the most common definition, you have to have good intentions. So it can be a warning or a complaint, but it has to be coming from a place of wanting to see things get better or be good for the organization. And typically it's studied as occurring between an employee and a manager as though it occurred in a private setting. But again, this is just the, commonly how it's studied. People like Potskov have, explained that this is, not the only way to think about or conceive of voice. It's often measured using this scale. Like a typical study might be having an employee fill out this questionnaire developed by Van Dyne and Lapine in 1998 about how often they voice, and then asking a manager to evaluate their performance. So items on this questionnaire would be like, how often does the employee develop and make recommendations concerning issues that affect the whole organization? How often do they speak up and encourage group members to get involved in issues that affect the organization? But lately, we've seen a little bit of a shift. We know that group meetings, they're an integral part of organizational life. They often provide the setting where voice occurs. And research is starting to catch up. Research is starting to study voice in groups. Once we start looking at voice in groups, then it opens up a whole world where peer behavior has an opportunity to be really influential and important. So what's great about voice? Research shows that effective group judgment, like wisdom of the crowds, creative problem solving, all that good stuff that we know about, group judgments, relies on group members needing to bring up lots of ideas. It doesn't work if people keep their good ideas to themselves or if good ideas are ignored. So with voice and organizations, it's the same idea. Like management is often out of touch and doesn't have eyes on the ground floor. So they need lower level employees who interact with customers and distributors to be able to speak up when they see a problem or when they have an idea for how to do something better. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on that important cognitive diversity. So voice is good for the company and it's good for the employee. When it benefits the organization, right, this is where it can lead to innovation and competitive advantage. And speaking up can be good for the employee because we've seen that where employees who voice more, they can get more status and they can, when they're getting evaluated by their managers, they can get better performance evaluations, although it is a little bit risky. But there is a huge but here, there's a huge catch, which is that voice has to be recognized and not dismissed or ignored. And there's some real reasons to worry that it would be. So what are some of these reasons? When we think about whose voice gets recognized in groups, while lots of things can matter, like the timing of voice and organizational norms, like, is it safe to speak up in this kind of group? Is it something people do here frequently? But I'm gonna focus on two specific ones today. And then the first is the type of voice. Right, so this one has become like a really important distinction in the voice literature, whether the voice is promotive, talking about a promotive issue or a prohibitive one. So by promotive, this is where someone is expressing new ideas or solutions for trying to improve the status quo. It's future oriented and the good intentions behind that voice are easily recognizable. But there's also a type of voice called prohibitive, where it's almost like a warning. It's expressing concern about some existing or impending factor that's harmful to the organization, the good intention behind speaking up, they're not easily recognizable because it can evoke defensiveness. And there's, so there could be different issues that lead to promotive or prohibitive ways of framing voice, but researchers have also tried to attack kind of the same underlying issue and just frame them in a promotive or prohibitive way. So here from a paper from McLean et al. In 2018 in an AMJ article, they sort of tackled the same underlying issue where there was a sales team and there was a script that wasn't good. And the sales team needed to change that script. And so it was framed in either a promotive way saying, I think we should come up with a new and improved script to give us more flexibility, or the employee spoke up using prohibitive voice saying, I think we should get rid of this unsuccessful script because it's, caused some problems. I see a hand. Is that, anyone have a question? Nope, not yet. No, keep going. Okay. So let's see what happened when an employee voiced using promotive voice versus prohibitive voice. I don't know if anyone wants to guess. You all know. Okay. While looking at, I was just sort of showing you part of their data here. Using promotive voice, the DV here was status in the group. The promotive voice led to higher status ratings for that employee than prohibitive voice. So it was more positive outcomes for the voicer. But this was actually only true for the male contributors. For female for women, they just weren't valued as much as contributors. So what might be going on for women can be understood through the lens of status characteristics theory. And this says that some contributors from the outset just aren't as likely to be recognized as legitimate contributors because of social attributes like their gender or race. then they won't get as many opportunities to speak up, and they won't be listened to as much when they do. This can be illustrated a little bit from this one study from 2005, where participants learned that a man and a woman worked on a financial task together and they did really well. They succeeded, like, good job, joint work. But they gave much more credit for that work to the man than for the woman, than they gave to the woman. And they rated the men as better task leaders and more competent. But unless the woman had unambiguously positive performance evaluations on file. So it suggests that there might be something about proving you're a high quality contributor that's important. So there could be something here that's changeable. And so this is a big deal because in all groups, like, one of the most important things on people's minds is hierarchy and status. Who's in charge and what's my own place in this group? What's my role here? What should I be doing? If we're using groups as a context for looking at voice, then we have to start thinking about what's important in groups, right? So getting and keeping status, it's been described as a fundamental human motive. And having higher status predicts important employee outcomes like morale and opportunities to advance, all of which make status an important outcome to understand. And when evaluating a group member's capacity to influence others and who has good ideas, people, they're often swayed by social factors beyond the actual substance of their contributions. So they pay attention to things like who speaks the most, who's got good clothing, who has a college degree, and race and gender. And they may or may not be relevant cues. So groups try to attribute status based on who's most deserving, like who's going to make a good contribution to the group, but they make mistakes. So what are your options for getting status in groups? You're in a meeting, different ideas are being tossed around, or you've got something to say, you've got a way to improve things. Say somebody voices, they make a contribution. Is that just their time to shine and you're out of luck? You've got limited opportunities to speak up in a group. How should you best use your time? What the theory says is you've got different pathways. Thanks, Joey Chang, for providing the world with this, with these two pathways to status, right? You could be dominant. You could really try to control the outcome here and assert yourself, or you could show your worth, show your expertise and competence, and embedded within that is you can show your value to the group using, like, a part of that is called competitive altruism. You can show your value to the group by showing that you're willing to put the group in front of your own needs, and like almost sacrifice yourself for the good of someone else in the group and for the good of the group as a whole. And so, sort of to lay that out, some options you have as a contributor to the group are, you could be quiet. Like, say you don't have standing, maybe one of your good options, I don't know that you would get a lot of status for this, but maybe at least you wouldn't lose it. You could just stay quiet. Another is you could voice a new idea. Speaking up in the group can lead to status. So this is potentially a good option for you. We're also often given the advice like, hey, promote yourself. This sometimes presents a pickle for women in particular, because we're told, hey, you in particular need to be like communal and looking out for others, but also don't be, too quiet. So promote yourself is an option we're given. But then we want to also add this other one, to amplify others. And this is something that we think has been happening in organizations out there in companies in the world, but it hasn't really made a name for itself in the academic literature yet. It hasn't really been studied. And so we wanted to formalize it and study it in research. And so our formal definition of amplification is a public endorsement of another's contribution with attribution to the original speaker. And it draws from related constructs, like in a growing literature on just supportive communication and recognition in general. But each part of this definition is important in its own right. So the public piece is important because, again, we're trying to draw a voice contribution out from that, limited private context of just between a manager and employee. So it's got to be something that's done in front of other people where they see it in the group or just in front of someone else. The endorsement, it doesn't necessarily have to be this like high praise thing that you're doing. It doesn't have to be like, this is a great idea. I love this idea. That's not what we mean by endorsement. We're really just trying to rule out bringing up someone else's idea to shoot it down. So it could be kind of like an implicit endorsement, like, hey, like that's an interesting idea. Like, let's think about that more. Or there's an idea. What did you mean by that? It's kind of like an implicit endorsement because you're you're saying that that idea is worthy of further consideration. Another person's contribution we sort of mean rather than your own. So trying to compare it, make a distinction between self-promotion and someone else's promotion. And then attribution to the original speaker, we think is such an important piece of this because often what happens in meetings is there's an idea or that gets voiced, and later, maybe that idea gets dismissed or discarded or ignored. And later, someone else comes up with the same idea. Like maybe they didn't realize someone else had already said it, or I don't know if they're actively trying to steal that idea, but they don't attribute that original contribution to the original speaker. And then that we saw from some previous research that just came out recently showing that this is actually something that happens in organizations, is the original source gets lost. And so then what? That's not what we mean by amplification. We mean you actually have to very clearly give credit to the original speaker. And I guess that could be like a gesture with your hands, but it just has to be known that this is not your idea. So here's just a quick example. There was a school having an issue. They were on probation and an employee had an idea for improving the student records because employees were not writing down all of the incidents they were supposed to. So in a meeting, she said, could we offer a small reward for well-kept books? And then Daniel's like, nah, seems like a waste of resources to pay people for doing what we're already paying them to do. And then Isabella's like, I think we should think about it since Lisa said the reward would be small and motivating them to keep great records is important. Okay, so again, she's not like, this is the best idea. She's like, well, let's keep thinking about it. But she is giving credit to the original speaker. Okay, so study one, we just want to know, what does amplification do? Are people who amplify helping one person but sacrificing themselves? Are they helping everybody in the group? Can it be helpful even in the case of particularly challenging voice, like a prohibitive voice idea? Or is the amplifier throwing themselves on the stake and taking a risk if they amplify prohibitive voice? And then after answering some of these questions that are more basic questions in study one, in study two, we're going to test amplification and gender differences. And then in study three, we're going to look at amplification in a field study to see if we can train people to amplify.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
So I don't know if your data explicitly speaks to this, but I'm curious of whether you just have any intuition about or any thoughts about, does it matter how one amplifies?
And what do you mean by how? Like in a more emphatic way or in a?
Well, I guess I could see it in a lot of different ways, but is it as simple as, any form of amplification has some benefits in terms of status, or is there more nuance in terms of, could there be certain ways in which somebody could amplify that just looks like ingratiation that actually ends up being more of a negative? Are there just ways of framing amplification that you think are going to be more effective than others?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm gonna have to probably throw it to future directions. This was really sort of our first pass, and we did not go in with lots of different iterations for ways to amplify. We started off just by maybe just one way of doing it compared to other tactics. I don't know if my co-authors have other things to say there, if you have guesses. She said intuition, so you're allowed to speculate.
I think, so my intuition is that, yes, there are ways that you could amplify and it might backfire. Like you said, if it comes across as really ingratiating, we're really curious about whether or not, like, maybe if there's strong fault lines in a group, if that can make a difference in terms of, oh, it just feels like you always, support them. It's just, your little group, your clique is helping each other kind of thing. And I think that might backfire. But we haven't had a chance to really get into that. And the variations we've done and the little bit where we've tried, I think some of it's the methodology we've used with written words. It's hard to get a lot of that tone in there, so it reads nicely. But my intuition is, yeah, it can. We just haven't found that data yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think all I want to add to that is that we do have a study 3 that Liz is going to present is in a field setting, and we kind of just gave people general instructions to do this. So we don't know how exactly they were doing it, but we didn't have as much control as we do in the scripts where we know exactly what the words are that people are saying. And yet we still saw some effects, which suggests that at least it's not super, super sensitive to the context. Surely there are going to be things that are going to affect people's interpretation, but that gave us at least some confidence that, you can just tell people to do this and it's going to work the way that we think.
Yeah, thanks. So for this study, wait. Yeah.
I was slow to unmute, and I'm trying to get good with my trigger finger here. Super interesting questions especially around fault lines and sort of thinking about how this plays out in a diverse group, which is kind of where a lot of my interests are these days in the voice and diversity space. So does it matter who amplifies? Given status characteristics theory, some people are going to automatically, because of their demographic group or some other diffuse characteristic, is going to kind of catapult them to the top, right, before we've really seen anything from them. And so the question is, so especially when it comes to men and women speaking up, right, does it matter if the amplifier is a woman and who they're amplifying, whose voice they're amplifying, versus a man? And just curious about the impact of the amplifier's own characteristics in the status hierarchy.
Yeah, no, I saw Joey on mute. Do you want to, what would be your guess there? Like, do you think, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had a similar interest, because I find like it's an interesting question to think about. Who are the people who are more likely to amplify, in part because I think like in some ways, if you're amplifying, you're kind of signaling, hey, I am a good judge of what good ideas are. So even, say demographic characteristics aside, it would seem to me that maybe people who are more confident are more likely to be amplifying. Just curious of your thoughts, because obviously you study confidence, so I'm going to guess that's one thing that you might have thought of.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You guys are getting right to the heart of it. So that's interesting. So one thought, I mean, maybe to take them one at a time. So Crystal's question was like, to unpack it a little bit, like if you are, seen as a lower status contributor in this particular group, like you're a woman or of a minority group, maybe you don't have standing in the group, your performance expectations coming in, I know people are like thinking like, is this a legitimate contributor? Could you speak up in this particular group? And if you speak up as an amplifier, what is your impact as an amplifier? And so maybe I'll kick that down the road too, but we were trying to hit that over the head directly with our study too, looking at when women are amplifiers versus men. We didn't have a racially diverse group looking at that, so we want to like continue doing research in this space. But we did set it up so that we did have status differences in that group, and just to preview the results, there was no interaction, and it was equally effective for women to be amplifiers as men. And some reasons, and we can talk about more when we get there, but some reasons are that if it is and this is maybe speaking to Joey's question, but if it is seen as a pro-social act, that's kind of communal, other-oriented, that's fine for women. Like, go ahead and, that's fine. You're allowed to do that as a woman. You're allowed to support others. And so it's not like overly dominant to insert yourself into a conversation to support others. And so it's actually like a technique or a tactic in a toolkit that could be really beneficial for women.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so to Joey, to speak to Joey's question, we're sort of seeing it as from the amplifier's perspective as like a pro-social communal thing to do, but I also think we do have some data showing that it is also agentic because you're seen as like competently like making sure that the group is not missing ideas and overlooking certain contributors.
Yeah, that makes sense to me in part because I'm thinking by amplifying, you're kind of acting like a leader, right? You're saying, okay, so and so had an idea. I think that's a good one, or that's a bad one. I'm going to ignore this other person. So I find that would be super interesting. And to one of the other questions that came up earlier, which is how do you different ways or different nuanced types of amplifying? I feel like in the future, it could be super interesting to look at how you amplify might come across as either agentic or as communal. So how you specifically go about it might make a difference in terms of the effects on the voicer and on the responder, the person who's doing amplifying. But yeah, very cool.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, let me go back to these results, but I think we should continue this conversation, especially when we're looking at like interpreting results from the studies, from study 2. So in this setting, this was an experimental vignette. We were using the McLean et al. Sales team meeting setting. We're looking at voice type, promotive versus prohibitive. Again, with the idea that both are important types of voice for organizations to hear, but prohibitive can lead to more, can be more challenging, can lead to more interpersonal issues potentially. The independent variable were 3 different response types that our peers could not choose from, that we chose for our peers. Amplification, voicing an additional idea, or staying quiet. Our dependent variable was the perceived status of the voicer and responder. And a mediator that we were looking at here was the perceived quality of the voiced idea, with the idea that maybe if the voicer gets amplified, then the perceived quality of their voiced idea would increase, making them seem like a more valuable contributor, thereby increasing their status. These were working adults on Prolific, about half women, half men. Their mean age was 34. They were mostly white. About 43% said that they had at least one direct report. Half of them had been at their job for less than or equal to 3 years. And 72% of them, most of them, said that they attended at least one meeting per week. So we thought it wasn't crazy to ask them to imagine that they were part of a sales team. So the premise was they're part of a sales team. Their performance has been low. And this was, I'm going to go through like a timeline of what the procedure looks like. So the responder, we're calling them the responder because they have an opportunity to respond to voice later. The responder first voices an idea. And the reason we wanted them to do that was in part because even in the staying quiet condition, when they don't really respond to the voice, we wanted them to be an active participant in the group. We didn't want them to just do nothing. And also they present an interesting comparison point later. We randomly assigned them to a promotive or prohibitive voice idea. Then the voicer voices an idea, again, promotive or prohibitively. And if the responder used promotive, then the voicer also used promotive. We kept that consistent. Then in every case, the voicer gets ignored. We say the person ignores the voicer's idea and asks about lunch. Then our independent variable is the responder either amplifies the voicer, provides an additional voiced idea, which is promotive or prohibitive, or just stays quiet and then the meeting ends. We say, oh, you got a phone call and had to rush out of the meeting. Our dependent measures, the participant then completes. They rate the status of the responder and the voicer and the quality of the responder and voicer's ideas. Oh, and they also rate the person who does the ignoring. They also rate that person's status. Okay, so this is just to unpack it. I'm going to walk you through as though you're a participant, so you can just really get a feel for what it was like. We say, imagine that you're a member of a sales team at InsureCo, a national insurance company. Your sales team answers customer calls, identifies their insurance needs. Your team is 10 professionals. They've been working together for about 9 months. oh, lately performance hasn't been very good. As a team and individually, you've just been struggling. The sales team decides to meet and discuss the decline in performance. And your job is to pay attention to people's behavior and just try to form an impression of each individual. So read about what happened, and then you'll answer questions. Just to unpack this, we used the same promotive and prohibitive voice that McLean et al. Had used, but then we also needed additional voice. So we pilot tested different ones, and we chose ones that were similar, just out of the gate, similar levels of quality. So just as an example, they would say, I think we should start reaching out to customers we haven't heard from in a while in order to make sure they're happy. That would be promotive framing. In the prohibitive condition, it was, I think we should stop losing touch with existing customers we haven't heard from in a while. So they're not, the wording isn't exactly parallel, but we tried to just capture the feel of a promotive versus a prohibitive voice. Then we showed them a summary of the meeting. We didn't actually call them responders and voicers. We used initials and kept gender and everything else ambiguous. But I thought it was just easier to present it here in this way. So we said, you give a pep talk to improve sales performance. Responder made a suggestion to improve performance. Voicer made a suggestion. Someone else ignored the suggestion and asked about lunch. Then in the amplification condition, responder reminded the group that the voicer had made a suggestion and encouraged the group to consider the idea, or responder made another suggestion to improve performance, or there was nothing. Here are what the measures looked like. This was our measure of status. It was 5 items where they rated on a scale from 1 to 5. How much status in the group does the responder have? How respected by the group are they? What's their prestige? Presumably they know what that word is. I don't know. Hopefully they do. How much influence do they have in the group, and how admired are they by the group? They also rated that for the voicer and for the other person. The idea quality measure were 6 items, and one of the items was like, the idea was based on the best available information, or the idea was made based on valid assumptions. They also rated the voicer's idea. Okay, here's what some of the data looks like. On the y-axis were ratings about the perceived idea quality of the voicer's idea. And what you can see is when the responder amplified the voicer's idea was seen as slightly better than in the other conditions when the responder stayed quiet or voiced a different idea. For the responder, and remember, in none of these conditions is the responder's idea amplified. So the responder, as we would expect, did not get a boost. They were rated as equally high across conditions. When we look at status, both the status of the voicer and the responder are increased in the amplification condition. That's when the voicer gets amplified by the responder compared to the other conditions. But the person who just asked about lunch, they don't increase in status. So it suggests that the effects of amplification, it's not just this universal positivity effect that the whole group benefits from. It's really specific to the people that are involved in the amplification. We also tested a mediation model. So we ran 2 different ones where we compared the amplification condition to either staying quiet or additional voice. And that had an effect on the status of the voicer. It was mediated by the perceived idea quality of the voicer's idea. Oh, right. And so then this was the interesting question, right? Was like, does this happen only when the voicer uses promotive voice, or does this also happen for prohibitive voice as well? And remember, prohibitive voice is more challenging. And so there was a main effect where promotive voice led to slightly more status than using prohibitive voice, but there was no interaction. And so using promotive voice and amplifying promotive voice meant equal benefits. It was okay to just, throw your hat in the ring with a voicer who used prohibitive voice. That was no problem. And being amplified by someone when you used prohibitive voice was still beneficial.
Liz, can I ask a tiny clarifying question?
Yes.
You asked them to rate the quality of the ideas and then status as a consequent. That's how impoverished is the situation? Do they have any information about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, like externally, or are they just following the narrative that it was amplified or it wasn't amplified, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, it's pretty impoverished. I would say. I don't know if authors want to disagree.
Well, no, it's fine. I just so that all of it is they're just judging the action of it being amplified in the meeting.
Yes.
Great.
And Liz, was that full mediation? And I'm asking that just because it seems like I could imagine other mechanisms that would explain why status might increase.
It was not full mediation.
Okay.
It was, and I think I put the numbers up in study 2. It was like around like 17% explained. So that leaves room for, well, it's tricky, right? Because on the one hand, I think it leaves room for other mechanisms. On the other hand, I almost like can't get away from thinking about it as a direct effect where the amplifier in some ways is saying like, you influenced me. I'm thinking about your idea. And that feels like a very direct way of saying that like, I'm giving you status.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it seems that there's going to be, certainly it's affecting judgments about the idea itself. And, is it a good idea? But I also don't think it's saying something about the person. And so that's kind of a different mechanism that I could imagine leading to status enhancement.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think nailing down the mechanisms, I think there's still room here for future directions to really unpack that further. So we're sort of proposing like one pathway that feels robust, that we can reliably. But I don't know that I would not want to say that that's the one true path, that this is, the only way that's making it work.
Liz, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
One thing I really appreciated about the experimental studies you conducted is that, as opposed to a lot of experiments we see where they just run like the hypothesized condition against the control where nothing happens, you have some competitive tests against alternatives, right? People staying quiet, just speaking up in their own way. Did you ever consider the opposite of amplification, though, where somebody would actually negate the voice? My thought is, that may not directly affect positively their status, but I was wondering if that might increase their psychological standing in another way. For example, credibility. So if somebody negates a voice event, right, that someone speaks up about, and they do it in a way demonstrating that it won't work, it's a bad idea, building off of Leif's question, then that could be a way for them to increase psychological standing without necessarily going through status. I just wondered if you had, if your team had considered that at all, or what would happen if somebody did the, I guess the opposite of amplification, whatever label you want to put on that.
So you're saying if like if somebody voices an idea and then the response to that is to shoot that idea down, does the responder skyrocket in status?
I'm saying not even necessarily status, but it could be another version of a psychological standing variable.
Yeah.
It could be
like dominance or.
Yeah, anything. I could see an increase in psychological standing in the eyes of other people, given, as Leif said, the sort of impoverished nature of the context where you don't have a lot of other information. And so if somebody shoots it down, but I was just really wondering if you had considered the opposite of amplification, which might look a little bit like prohibited voice, right? Someone raises an idea and I say, well, we shouldn't do that for the following reasons.
I mean, in some Yeah, we have run a version where instead of having an ignorer, where somebody ignores the idea and asks about lunch, they actively dismissed it. And people, at least our participants in our samples, which were either, I don't know, the M-Turkers or people on Prolific, for the most part, they don't like that person. They see that person as being mean. But in like a more cutthroat professional setting, maybe they would have more respect for that. Like, maybe I need some more executive MBAs in my sample. Sorry.
I love that. So true. So can I just follow up on that? Because
Yeah.
I think that as soon as, whenever I talk with practitioners about this idea of, you need to act on people's ideas, like you need to, and then the first thing they tell me is, well, what if it's a crappy idea? What if it's just a bad idea? Like, isn't it problematic to let non-viable ideas get amplified,
Yeah. Yes.
get a ton of attention?
Yes.
It's like, we're trying to dismiss that. Oh, no, we're still going to talk about that because she talked, and keep bringing it back. So I kind of with Nathan a little bit about there has to be a function. I mean, of course I'm going to make an argument. There has to be a function for prohibitive voice, or you gotta be able to say no to some things. And then, but I think the bigger question is what happens when there's a lot of amplification of like not actually high quality ideas.
Yeah.
Where they know.
So this is something that we've talked about this a lot, and we've got some thoughts about it. One is that we have run a study where we like had amplifiers amplify like very bad ideas, and we did see we still saw status increases for the amplifier and the voicer, even when there were bad ideas, but we didn't see the bad ideas change, like skyrocket in perceived quality so much that it changed the rank order of like that. Now the bad ideas were rated as wonderful ideas. That said, like at the margins, sure, like you do. The other thing we're saying though is we are seeing an increase in perceived idea quality. And so yes, we are upsetting the marketplace of ideas. And so our message is that amplification might be a powerful tool and that you would want to use it with discretion and be careful that like the ideas that you amplify are going to be seen as slightly better than they would have before. And so, yeah, you probably don't want to go like amplifying terrible ideas, like lest they then, improve in quality in the eyes of the group. So that is our message. Yeah, like don't go amplifying everything.
So like finding the undervalued ideas.
Yeah.
The ones that, you feel like have merit, but they, for whatever reason, got ignored. And okay,
right,
that's cool.
Because remember that we are not perfect at attributing status to the people who deserve it. We're not perfect at knowing which ideas are actually coming from valid contributors or not. And we are swayed by attributes that don't matter. So it might not be a terrible idea to, like, if you thought that idea, if you don't know if it was good or not, like you can't tell. Mm-hmm. It might be worth trying to err on the side of giving it a second hearing.
Yeah, love it. Thanks.
Okay. So summary of study one really quick. That prior work linking voice and status has focused on status of outcomes for the voicer. Our work is focusing on the potential opportunity for status attainment for multiple parties. So peer recognition can affect important outcomes for not just one person. It's not just like this is that person's opportunity to shine. It's not that it's a zero-sum game for voice. It could be an opportunity for multiple parties. A possible mechanism, although we've talked about how this is not like the one and done mechanism necessarily, is that it could be explained by an increase in perceived idea quality, which connects to the idea of, maybe we're altering performance expectations. And it's interesting that amplifying was beneficial whether the voicer used promotive or prohibitive voice. And so we think this is an important first step for thinking about whether amplification might be useful to help marginalized or underrepresented groups gain influence in the workplace. Which leads to study two, where we want to examine whether peer response to amplification makes the voiced idea seem better, whether it leads to status attainment for the voicer and responder, and whether those benefits extend to voicers who are men and women. These were 1,600 plus adults on MTurk. We tried to target a large sample because we wanted to look for, we were looking for this interaction that like sneak preview wasn't there, that men and women actually benefited equally from amplifying and being amplified. I'm going quick because I'm worried about time. And so we also added a new response, the self-promotion condition.
Liz?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know you want to go quick, but I just
okay.
wanted to ask a quick question about
Yeah.
Some other work that I didn't see incorporated in your paper, and I just wondered if you had considered it. So Alad Sherf and a couple of his colleagues have a paper on men. I wouldn't call it amplification necessarily given your definition, but men speaking up, voicing about gender-related issues, specifically female issues. And they do show differences. And I wondered if you had thought about that work when you were designing your this study in particular, and thinking about the differences that you might see between men and women. Obviously, there's an amplification difference. I don't know if you would call what they're doing in their study amplification. And also, I don't think you have a gender-specific issue in this lab study, but I just wondered if you had thought about whether there might be more interactions between the gender, the specific issue that's being amplified. And also, I kind of viewed amplification through a dyadic lens, since you have the voicer, you have what you're calling the respondent, or the the amplifier. And I'd wondered if you had considered those potential interactions at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. We did not. We made the issues pretty neutral, so we did not add that piece in. I know in some of your papers you like to have lots and lots of conditions. We did not do that. So that's my path. I'm gonna punt on that.
I appreciate you not saying. I appreciate you not saying too many conditions to people, but that would have been fine as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah,
but I appreciate that because I don't have a good answer. Okay, in this study, it was a similar design, but we were manipulating the gender of the responder and the voicer. And again, we just added that extra self-promote condition. The premise was very similar, but we gave more background information about the team. So here's an example. We had Daniel, who the regional manager had notes about Daniel. And we said, he's an amazing innovator. He's a million ideas in his head and just wants to do it. He's willing to take the chance, even though it's risky. And then Erica, notes from the regional manager, she's got so much energy and she's always got a happy face. She's doing all right now, but she has no control or clue. And then Morgan, Kristen volunteered to be Morgan, although we were like, you're not gonna like it when we have to put this up when we're giving a talk. It's like Morgan, average performer who meets expectations. And even though that one, we did lie about Morgan because Kristen's not an average performer. And you may be thinking like, wow, these are like really sexist things to say about these employees. Did you just make those up? And in fact, we didn't, unfortunately, make those up. We got those directly from a study of entrepreneurs who were trying to get funding for their businesses from venture capitalists. And in this study, they recorded what the venture capitalists said about the entrepreneurs when they left the room. And what they said about the male entrepreneurs were the male things. And what they said about the female entrepreneurs were the female things. And they were pretty sexist. So we just grabbed those and put them in to get these gendered stimulus materials. And we thought it was necessary because if you just put up, like on MTurk, if you just put up like photos of women and men in suits, you're not going to get huge status differences. So you do need to add a little bit more enriching materials. So that's where we got those from. It's kind of depressing, but that's where they were. We also used a broader pool of photos than just the ones I showed. We didn't have a lot of diversity in our photos, so that's something to think about in the future. But I just wanted to show that we used a bunch thanks to a good Data Colada post, making that an important feature of studies that we needed to think about. Okay, so then after you finished talking in the meeting, we showed the meeting, so you had some background information, and then here's what the meeting looked like. After you finished talking, Daniel, one of the sales representatives, says this.
I think we should start reaching out to customers we haven't heard from in a while in order to make sure they are happy. My idea is to call customers at regular intervals and ask them how our products are working out for them, so we can fix any issues before they arise and make sure our customers are satisfied. I think proactively reaching out to customers will help us all be really successful.
If you want to hear the comparison, what our women said. Whoops.
I think we should streamline our documentation in order to give us more time to call and help customers going forward. My idea is to create one online system where we could enter all the relevant data about our sales calls and the customers so we can save time and spend more of our day meeting customers' needs. I think a new streamlined system will help us all supercharge our work.
Does anyone know if lunch is catered today?
Okay, that's what our ignorer sounded like. And then this is what amplification sounded like.
Erica just suggested we create a new and improved script that will give us more flexibility to better meet the needs of customers and help us all perform better. I think we should consider this idea.
Yeah. In the self-promotion condition, it was the exact same thing, but we had chopped in the word Erica and we chopped in the word I. So it was the exact same thing, except promoting their own idea. And then the additional voice condition was just another idea. And then when staying quiet, again, it was nothing. We had replicated all of the results from study 1. I'm just going to blow through this really fast, which is probably what you're not supposed to do. Okay, gender results. This is showing that even though we'd really made it pretty obvious, we were still getting like fairly small but significant differences in people rating the male employees as higher status than the female employees out of the gate. But the male and female responders got similar benefits to amplifying. There was no interaction there. And the female voicers benefited from being amplified the same amount. Again, amplification, it just appears to be a good way for people to improve their standing in the group, even if they belong to lower status social categories. But what if you've been working with people for a long time? Can it still help? We wanted to see if you could train people to amplify in a real organization and explore those effects. So we looked at a nonprofit school and where there were teachers, paraeducators, speech and language pathologists. It was a small organization, so there were only about 77 employees who did the pre-intervention survey. The intervention was the school director. It was such a small school that we couldn't do like a full randomized trial. We had the director identify employees who she thought lacked due influence. And then we gave those people the intervention. They watched a survey. They did a Qualtrics survey where they watched videos of people amplifying, and it was interactive where they were like, I think this person amplified, and then we said what we saw as amplification. And then we bugged them for 2 weeks every day saying, did you amplify today? Who did you amplify? How did that go? And then we asked the other members of their group, so they met in teams with about 10 people per team. And we asked, we didn't tell them that there was an intervention going on, but we were like, how supportive are people in this group of each other's ideas? And how much do people in this group promote each other's ideas? And so that was our manipulation check. And then we didn't do like a full status questionnaire. We just did 2 items. How much influence does each person have during team meetings? And how would you characterize the level of respect for those people? This is just a manipulation check showing that even though the people didn't know there was an intervention going on, they felt that there was more support or amplification going on after the intervention. People who were not in the intervention group did not experience any change in status, but people in the intervention group did experience an increase. And so we're like, okay, we can train people and we didn't cause any harm, so we're happy with that. And okay, so the future directions, let me look at my clock. We sort of talked about these already, but we are definitely interested in pursuing some like boundary conditions that we wanted to think about. What if, again, like Tamara mentioned this earlier, I think like, what if you are amplifying someone, but it's not seen as a pro-social thing, it's seen as like just enhancing like some subgroup within your, you've got like some subgroup that your team is benefiting, but not the whole group. Could these effects change over time? Are these benefits long lasting? Are the group performance and decision quality was something we talked about too. Like if you amplify bad ideas, are you going to really upset the marketplace, or might this actually be counteracting some biases that your group was having and suffering from initially? And then we're also wondering, like, maybe this could, change the climate in the group for better. Like if all of your group starts amplifying, maybe that could create reciprocity, increase psych safety, and maybe that would have an overall effect of increasing voice frequency. That's not something that we directly measured, but something that would be interesting to look at in the future. So in theory, when employees voice suggestions for organizational improvement, they should not only contribute to organizational success, but they should gain status for it. In practice, that's not often what happens. Voicers go unrecognized, their voice goes underutilized, and our research demonstrates that peers might be an overlooked resource. Voicers attain higher status when a peer amplifies their voice. And furthermore, our mediation results suggest that this happens maybe because voicers' contributions are perceived to be higher quality when the contributions are amplified. Importantly, amplifiers benefit as well. These results are the first to show that peers can respond to a group member's voice in ways that positively affect both their own social outcomes and those of the voicer, thus demonstrating how voice can pave the way for non-zero-sum gains. Okay, I'm happy to stick around and take more questions, but I wanted to thank my panel whose work inspired a lot of our work for doing this at all in the first place. And thanks to the Data Colada crew for making this happen.
Thanks so much, Liz. Thanks to all the panelists, and thanks to our audience. Really been great. We appreciate everyone being here. And once again, all of your submitted questions will get to Liz. And other than that, we will hopefully see everybody again next week. All right, take care.